I grew up believing my family was simple, steady, and unshakable. My mother was the kind of woman everyone admired. Gentle voice, calm smile, always putting our home first. My father spent most days working long hours, convinced he was securing our future. I never questioned anything. Our routine felt normal. Rushed breakfasts, quiet dinners, weekends that came and went without much excitement. If someone asked me back then what my life was like, I would have said peaceful, maybe even boring. I didn't realize peace can sometimes hide the first cracks. Mom had always been predictable. She woke early, cooked, cleaned, and checked on everyone else before herself. She rarely left the house without a reason, and she never missed a family moment. But a few months before everything changed, small details began to feel different. She started humming more, smiling at nothing, staring into her phone a little too long. At first I brushed it off. People change. Maybe she was trying something new. Maybe she was just happy. But her happiness felt secretive. She became protective of her phone, slipping it into her pocket when someone walked into the room. She spent more time in the garden talking quietly on calls she ended quickly whenever she noticed me nearby. Her outfits changed too. She swapped her simple clothes for nicer ones, fixing her hair even when she wasn't going anywhere special. When I asked, she laughed lightly and said she just wanted a fresh start. I didn't know what that meant, and my father didn't notice much. Work consumed him. He came home tired, distracted, barely looking up from his laptop. If Mom was different, he didn't react. Their conversations were short, polite, almost mechanical. They didn't argue, but they didn't laugh either. It felt like they were living beside each other instead of with each other. I sensed something uncomfortable in that silence, but I told myself every marriage has quiet phases. I didn't want to imagine anything worse. Then Mom started mentioning a surprise. She brought it up casually, saying she was planning something big, something that would change everything for our family in a good way. She said it with a brightness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think it was something exciting, maybe a vacation, a celebration, something hopeful. The word surprise became this mysterious promise hanging in the air. And even though I was curious, I didn't pry. Still, I couldn't ignore the shift. She went out more, sometimes in the evenings, saying she needed to prepare a few things. She returned home glowing, almost nervous, like she was holding a thrill she couldn't release yet. I felt torn, half proud seeing her happy, half unsettled because I didn't understand why. One night, as she passed by me, her phone buzzed. A name flashed on the screen. Someone I didn't recognize, and her smile changed into something private, almost intimate. She didn't notice I'd seen it, but in that moment, something inside me tightened. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time in my life, I felt that our perfect, quiet family might not be as solid as I'd always believed. And whatever this surprise was, it wasn't as simple as Mom made it sound. The days that followed made it harder to ignore what I'd seen. That unfamiliar name on her phone became a shadow in my mind. Mom began leaving the house more often, always with vague explanations, errands, preparations, things she couldn't talk about yet. She came back later than usual, sometimes after dark, smelling of perfume she never used before. Her cheeks looked flushed, her eyes brighter, like she was living in a world the rest of us weren't invited into. I kept trying to convince myself it was harmless, but the more I watched, the more the pieces refused to fit home. She was present in body but distant in spirit. She'd drift through conversations, respond absent-mindedly, and disappear into her room to check her phone. The secrecy wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. I noticed small things: deleted call logs, a new lock on her phone, muted notifications. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled too quickly and said she was just excited about the surprise. Her voice sounded rehearsed, almost defensive. It left me with a quiet ache I didn't know how to name. My father stayed buried in work, unaware or unwilling to question anything. He barely glanced up when she left the house, barely reacted when she returned, glowing with a happiness that had nothing to do with him. Their connection, already thin, felt like it was fading into nothing. Watching them made me uncomfortable, like I was witnessing the slow unraveling of something sacred. I wondered if Dad noticed and chose silence, or if he was simply too distant to care. Either way, the silence between them grew heavier. One afternoon, while looking for tape in a drawer, I found something I wasn't meant to see. A A small box with a delicate bracelet inside, elegant and expensive, tagged with a note that didn't carry my father's handwriting. The words were brief but intimate, signed with the same unfamiliar name I'd seen on her phone. My chest tightened. It wasn't proof, but it was close enough to shake me. She had never mentioned buying jewelry, and my father hadn't bought her anything in years. The realization left me cold. Someone out there mattered to her in a way we didn't understand. The turning point came when she said she needed to go out just for an hour. Something in her tone felt nervous, almost rushed, and without thinking, I followed her at a distance. I hated myself for doing it, but curiosity had turned into fear. She walked with purpose, dressed carefully, hairstyled, lips colored. She wasn't running errands. She was meeting someone. When she reached a quiet cafe, she paused, checked her reflection, and then he appeared, the same name, now a real person. The way her face lit up was unmistakable. It wasn't polite joy. It was affection, deep and familiar, like she'd stepped into the arms of someone who made her feel alive. They sat close, leaning in, laughing softly, sharing a warmth I had never seen between my parents. At one point, his hand brushed hers and she didn't pull away. She held it gently like it was the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, the truth hit me harder than any confrontation could. This wasn't a coincidence, a friend, or a harmless secret. It was something emotional, intimate, and dangerously real. I felt betrayal, confusion, and fear all at once. My mother, our foundation, was living a hidden life. And whatever this surprise was, it wasn't meant to bring our family together. It was a doorway to a truth that could tear everything apart. I went home that day feeling like the ground had tilted under my feet. I couldn't get the image out of my mind, her smile, the way she leaned toward him, the warmth in her eyes that I had never seen directed at my father. I didn't know what to do with the truth. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to pretend I'd imagined it, and part of me felt guilty for knowing something I was never meant to see. The weight of it sat in my chest, tightening every breath. I couldn't look at her the same when she walked through the door that evening, pretending nothing had happened, humming softly like she was floating through some dream. I avoided her eyes because I was afraid she'd see the knowledge in mine. Days passed, and the secret began to eat at me. Every time she smiled, it felt like a lie. Every time she mentioned the surprise, it sounded like a threat instead of a gift. I stopped sleeping properly, replaying everything in my head, wondering how long this had been going on and why none of us noticed. I watched my father sitting at the table, tired and unaware, and the thought of him discovering the truth made my stomach twist. I didn't know whether to protect him or confront her. The silence was its own kind of torment. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. One evening, when she was alone, I asked her directly if she was happy. The question caught her off guard. She stared at me for a moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, sadness, maybe guilt. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. Something inside me snapped. The words spilled out. Not everything I'd seen, but enough to make her freeze. I asked if there was someone else in her life, someone she hadn't told us about. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and her silence was louder than any denial. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile, like she was holding herself together by a thread. She admitted there was someone from her past, someone she had once loved before my father, someone she thought she'd lost forever. She said she hadn't gone looking for him, that he appeared when she felt the most alone. She said she hadn't planned for any of this. She told me she felt invisible at home, ignored, like her presence didn't matter anymore. She said she had spent years trying to be the perfect wife and mother, but somewhere along the way she had forgotten who she was. This man reminded her of a version of herself she'd buried long ago. Hearing her say it didn't make the pain smaller. It only made it more real. She confessed that the surprise she kept talking about wasn't a celebration. It was the truth she had been gathering the courage to reveal. She said she didn't want to keep living two lives. She wanted to come clean. She wanted change even if it hurt. She started crying, saying she never meant to break the family, but she felt trapped in a marriage that had turned into routine instead of love. She said she didn't know what she wanted anymore, only that she couldn't keep pretending. I didn't have answers. I didn't know how to comfort her or how to forgive her. I just stood there, stunned, trying to understand how the woman who had held our family together now felt like she was slipping away from it. Just as she wiped her tears and tried to steady herself, the sound of footsteps filled the silence. My father stood there, having heard enough to know something was terribly wrong. His face went pale, and in that moment the secret wasn't a secret anymore. Everything we feared had finally collided with reality. The life we knew was no longer intact, and nothing about our family felt safe or certain anymore. The moment my father appeared, the room shifted into a silence that felt sharp enough to cut. He didn't shout or demand answers. He just looked at her with a kind of disbelief that was worse than anger. His eyes moved between us, piecing together what he'd overheard. My mother tried to speak, but her voice collapsed into a whisper. My father asked one question: was she in love with someone else? The tremble in his voice made it clear he already knew the answer. She didn't deny it. She closed her eyes and nodded, just once, and that tiny motion shattered whatever was left of the life we recognized. Why father didn't lash out. He stepped back like he needed distance just to breathe. He sank into a chair, staring at the floor, as though he was trying to understand how the woman he'd shared a home with had drifted so far away. My mother sat across from him, hands shaking, saying she never meant for it to go this far, that she felt lonely, unseen, like their marriage had become a duty instead of a connection. Her words weren't excuses, they were confessions. My father listened in silence, his face drained, his chest rising and falling like each breath hurt. Eventually, he asked why she didn't talk to him, why she turned to someone else instead of trying to fix what was broken. She admitted she'd tried in small ways, but every time she reached out, he was buried in work, too tired, too distracted. She said she felt like a ghost in her own home. She said this man made her feel alive again, reminded her she was still a person, not just a role. The honesty stung all of us. It was painful, but it was real. There were no dramatic ultimatums, just raw truth. My father said he needed time, space, and clarity. He couldn't pretend nothing had happened. He couldn't share a home with a lie. He suggested they separate temporarily, not as punishment, but as a way to breathe and decide whether there was anything left worth saving. My mother agreed, tears streaming, saying she didn't want to destroy the family, but she couldn't continue living in silence and emptiness. She said she was willing to face the consequences, whatever they were. The next days were quiet and heavy. My father packed a few things and moved out for a while. The house felt hollow, like the walls were holding their breath. My mother stopped talking about surprises. She stopped humming. She spent her days in reflection, finally confronting the mess she tried to outrun. I watched both of my parents break in their own ways. My father mourning trust, my mother mourning the person she once was. It wasn't the explosive ending I imagined. It was slower, deeper, and more complicated. Over time they agreed to counseling, not to pretend everything was fine, but to understand what had gone wrong long before the affair ever happened. They weren't promising reunion, forgiveness, or forever. They were choosing honesty instead of silence. I realized the surprise wasn't a gift or a celebration. It was a truth that forced us all to wake up. Our family didn't end, but it transformed. The illusion of perfection shattered, leaving room for something more honest, even if it was painful. Looking back, that moment changed us forever. It taught me that families don't fall apart in a single day. They drift quietly until someone finally speaks. And sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie, but it's the only thing that gives you a chance to rebuild, even if the pieces never fit the same again.